can be genuinely difficult to describe Margot Robbie without coming across as exaggerating or hyperbolic. She has one of the most recognizable faces working in Hollywood. She is supremely talented and has a habit of stealing not only scenes but entire films. There have been powerhouse blockbusters, huge critical and commercial flops, and everything in between in Margot Robbie's extensive back catalogue. But no matter what, she typically tends to be one of the best things about them. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, here with every Margot Robbie movie ranked from worst to best. Number 26, Vigilante. Before Margot Robbie broke into Hollywood, she featured in 2 low-budget movies from Australian filmmaker Ash Aaron. Very low budget. The first of these was Vigilante in 2008, in which she played Cassandra, the wife of Luke, who was attacked and assaulted. The rest of the film is a by-the-numbers revenge flick, but the story, the dialogue, the acting, and just about everything else make it difficult to sit through. At least it was the first step on the film ladder for Margot Robbie. But that's about the only positive you can take from it. Number 25, I See You. 1 year after Vigilante came I See You, another collaboration between Margot Robbie and Ash Aaron. This time, the future megastar played the lead role of Tristan Waters, one of 3 characters who spy on their neighbour only to be stalked by him in return. There are exactly the same issues with ICU as with Vigilante, though more Margot Robbie on screen puts the former ahead. It is far from her best performance, as is to be expected, but she is the only person on screen who looks as though she is actually there to act, and though the director was not above using her for gratuitous sex appeal, Robbie did the best that she could with what she was given. Number 24, Suicide Squad. Every now and then, incredible performances can get trapped in terrible movies that simply didn't deserve them. Margot Robbie deserved better than David Ayer's Suicide Squad, and David Ayer's Suicide Squad damn sure didn't deserve Margot Robbie. As Harley Quinn, Robbie's performance instantly became legendary. Almost overnight, the character was everywhere. You couldn't move at Halloween without seeing a handful of the psychotic killer, and she was by far the best aspect of this disappointing DCEU outing. The film did its level best to try and drag Robbie and Harley down with it, with more than a few shameless shots that were there for no other reason than sex appeal. But even so, her performance rose above and stood out for all the right reasons. Harley was insane, she was funny, she was compelling, and she even managed to be sympathetic within it all. Back in the early days of the DCEU, Harley Quinn was arguably the most popular character in the franchise, right next to Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, but she was trapped within one of the worst comic book movies in recent memory. Number 23, Terminal. When watching Terminal, it's easy to see how Margot Robbie's performance as Harley Quinn influenced her casting as psychotic twins Annie and Bonnie. There's a similar vibe, although the twins are more cerebral and calculating, and Robbie is easily the best part about the movie, even if her English accent is far from flawless. Terminal itself aimed for a neo-noir thriller surrounding the lives of a handful of contract killers, but never quite got off the ground thanks to poor dialogue and a frustratingly uninteresting story that couldn't be saved by what was supposed to be a shocking twist towards the end. Like many of the entries that will follow on this list, Robbie's performance is the brightest shining light in Terminal, but unfortunately not bright enough to save the uninspiring feature. Number 22, The Legend of Tarzan. There are plenty of movies that have attempted to retell classic stories with a twist, usually taking on something of a darker, grittier angle. See the likes of King Arthur, The Legend of the Sword, or Hercules. The Legend of Tarzan is one of them, and like most, it fails to recapture the magic of what came before, or add something different enough to make it feel fresh or even particularly necessary. Even in spite of a stellar cast featuring Alexander Skarsgård, Samuel L. Jackson, Christoph Waltz, Djimon Hounsou, and of course Margot Robbie, David Yates' 2016 outing is rather forgettable. Far from the deepest of characters Robbie has ever brought to the screen, it truly feels as though she could play Tarzan's Jane in her sleep. Thankfully, she has risen far above the role of the cliché love interest since 2016. Number 21, Slaughterhouse Rules. When you think of horror comedy starring Simon Pegg, you'd immediately go to the Cornetto trilogy. Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End are all far superior to 2018's Slaughterhouse Rules, in which a fracking project underneath a posh boarding school releases the monsters that live underneath it, and which fails to hit the mark in both the horror and comedy categories. As a tiny appearance, seeing Margot Robbie Robbie's face on screen is a fun surprise that stands out as one of the better moments in the film, as she plays an old flame of Meredith's that he is trying to reconcile with. Ultimately, however, her role is little more than a Zoom call cameo, and though it momentarily buoys the struggling movie, it's not enough to have any real impact. Number 20. Goodbye Christopher Robin. Such is the star power and ability of Margot Robbie, most of the movies she has appeared in have leaned heavily on her performance. And why wouldn't they? She is one of those actors who tends to make better anything she appears in. However, Goodbye Christopher Robin is slightly different in that the story very much surrounds A.A. Milne and his ultimately strained relationship with his son. Though she has her moments, the film wouldn't be too different if Robbie's Daphne, wife of Milne, were to be removed. The movie itself is a powerful biopic that poignantly treads through the pitfalls of celebrity and even emotional manipulation for a heartwarming reconciliation that didn't actually happen in truth. Number 19. Dreamland. Dreamland is a movie that arguably more so than ever needs Margot Robbie's charisma and charm, and not to mention her best accent to date, to lift it from a waste of time halfway to enjoyable. While on the hunt from the law after robbing a bank, Alison Wells ultimately finds protection in the form of Eugene Evans. The two fall for each other while on the run as the latter falls deeper into the former's world. But while the two actors enjoy a strong chemistry on screen, the film needed more, almost as something of an homage to the likes of Bonnie and Clyde. Instead, with Robbie's Alison taking the lead rather than her male counterpart, Dreamland brings to the table some truly beautiful cinematography, but frustratingly little in the way of substance. Two characters falling in love under difficult circumstances isn't enough to make a compelling film on its own. Number 18. Peter Rabbit and Peter Rabbit 2: The Runaway. Beatrix Potter and her Peter Rabbit works have been beloved British institutions for centuries, and as such, any movie adaptations were going to be automatically met with a certain amount of skepticism, being hailed as a far too modern take on the character and deviating too far from the original creation. Peter Rabbit and Peter Rabbit 2: The Runaway have seen their share of hate. However, as a box office hit, the franchise clearly won over the children to which it was aimed, even if it wasn't so successful in other demographics. Margot Robbie's role as Flopsy doesn't allow her to stretch any kind of acting muscles, as you would expect, and neither does her narration. As a relatively small part of the franchise, she at least offers small glimpses of cheeky comic relief, even if the films themselves aren't quite as charming as intended. Number 17. Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. As a movie boasting as potentially dangerous a premise as a comedy revolving around the war in Afghanistan, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot could have been a lot worse. However, at the same time, it could have been a lot better. It feels like the premise alone should have made the film more memorable than it ultimately became. The plot revolves around Tina Fey's Kim Baker, a reporter who moves to the war-torn country on an assignment and ultimately loves what she does despite the subject she is covering and the difficulties faced as a woman. Margot Robbie's involvement comes as a friend, but also as journalistic competition, as Tanya goes behind Kim's back for her own job. It's a typically strong performance from Robbie as she walks the line between comedy and drama better than anyone else in the film, if only the Australian twang in her London accent wasn't too difficult to ignore. Number 16. Focus. There are certain things that have come to be expected from any Margot Robbie appearance, and among the likes of stealing any scene she is in and charming the hell out of anyone watching, is the fact that she always seems to have incredible chemistry with whoever she shares the screen with. A year before they came together in Suicide Squad, Robbie and Will Smith led Focus. It's not the most memorable of movies, but it's a fun couple of hours with twists upon twists upon twists, arguably too many twists, propelled in the most part by the two powerhouse actors. Nicky is a con man who takes the inexperienced Jess under his wing only to split and ultimately reunite 3 years later. Their relationship is at the core of the film, and the cons they pull are certainly fun, but it is Robbie who steals the show, as usual. With Jess, the actor offers the full range from young and naive through to powerful and confident femme fatale, with a lot of vulnerability thrown in for good measure. It's a performance that outshines the rest of this fun but flawed popcorn flick. Number 15. Sweet Française. The forbidden love angle is as old as time, and they don't come more forbidden than between a German soldier and an oppressed villager in Nazi-occupied France. It makes for an incredibly powerful story. When the Nazis invade the villagers' homes in Sol Dib's Sweet Française, Bruno Van Volk slowly falls in love with Lucille, who, against the very reasonable and understandable objections of her mother-in-law, Madame Angelier, falls falls in love right back. Margot Robbie only brings to life a small supporting role as Celine, one of Madame Angelier's tenants. It's a solid if unspectacular performance, as instead this movie is purely that of Michelle Williams, one of the only people in Hollywood who would be able to steal the show from Robbie even if the latter had a larger role. Though the picture fell short of its Oscar expectations, it is a strong addition to the wartime romance genre. Number 14. Amsterdam. Initially touted as a potential Oscar winner, with an ensemble cast that could make literally any other film in history jealous, the movie quite famously failed to live up to its lofty budget and expectations. The story revolves around three friends who get framed for murder in a story that couldn't decide whether it wanted to be a wacky comedy or a serious social commentary. There were plenty of harsh reviews for Amsterdam upon its release, with the inconsistent tone, uninspired direction, and poor script in particular coming under fire. Not one single bad word was aimed at Margot Robbie though, as she and Christian Bale were easily and unsurprisingly the highlights. Though not what was necessarily expected, as it fell short of being another American Hustle from David O. Russell, Bale and Robbie in particular make Amsterdam worth a watch, though probably just the once. Number 13. Asteroid City. Wes Anderson has, over the years, established a certain and unmistakable style to his movies that simply can't be emulated or found anywhere else. As per usual, you have to really buy into said eccentricity and straight-up weirdness to enjoy Asteroid City. Behind the whimsy and incredible art style, Anderson is still typically able to tackle heavy themes, and Asteroid City is no different. In this case, it's uncertainty and battling with what can't be controlled, framed in such a way like an actor in a play not understanding what the play is about, but having to carry on anyway. Lost in a sea of famous faces and Oscar winners is Margot Robbie's cameo appearance. The story is told on two different levels, as a play and as a TV documentary surrounding the making of the play. Robbie almost bridges the gap between the two framing devices as the actress who played the wife of Augie Steenbeck until her scene was cut. Jones Hall, the actor who played Steenbeck in the play, listened to her run her lines, and the face of uncertainty seems to find some comfort. Anderson has a history of casting huge actors for minor yet important parts, and Robbie's few minutes on screen showed why this is such a good idea. Number 12. Mary, Queen of Scots. Historical figures are never easy roles to take on, and Margot Robbie playing Elizabeth I in Mary, Queen of Scots was absolutely no different. Granted, this particular movie gave itself an immediate uphill battle thanks to some rather hefty inaccuracies in the story, but portraying the Queen of England was always going to be tough. Ultimately, the film is about both Robbie's Queen Elizabeth I and Saoirse Ronan's titular Mary, Queen of Scots, as two powerful women navigating ruling a masculine world. It's quite fitting then that both actors' performances are easily the best thing about it. There are plenty of issues throughout the exposition-heavy story that make its 2-hour runtime feel like a hell of a lot longer than it is. However, the payoff of the two women finally meeting after being kept separate for the bulk of the picture is worth the wait. Displaying strength, vulnerability, fear, and yet courage, the story anchors on the meeting that both Robbie and Ronan pour everything into. A character-driven story such as this needed to make certain that its casting was flawless, and thankfully it succeeded. Number 11. Z for Zachariah. In a movie with a cast list just 3 names long, there really is nowhere to hide, particularly when one of them is the uber-popular Chris Pine and another is Chiwetel Ejiofor, one of the most constantly solid performers in the business. And yet, Margot Robbie never looks out of place for even a beat in Z for Zachariah. In fact, of the 3, she is arguably the most compelling, which is truly saying something. Tensions run at an impossible level from start to finish when you throw the last 3 people alive into an apocalyptic love triangle, with underlying themes of religious differences and alcoholism. It's an intriguing exploration of human nature that is completely and utterly reliant on the 3 actors on screen. Each one puts in an outstanding performance, but it's hard to look past Margot Robbie's role as Anne Burden at the center of everything as the piece's MVP. Number 10. The Suicide Squad. After James Gunn was fired by Marvel, DC wasted no time in picking the director up for a new Suicide Squad movie that didn't quite fully fit in either the sequel or reboot category. It was a bit of both, but arguably the most important thing was that Margot Robbie was brought back. As Harley Quinn, she was easily the best part of the first outing 5 years prior, and arguably the entire DCEU EU at that point. Though her supporting characters were better, the story was better, and the overall movie was better, Robbie was still easily the best part of the Suicide Squad as well. Though it was a team story with the likes of Idris Elba, John Cena, and Joel Kinnaman playing hugely important roles, there were times when this felt more like a Harley Quinn film, and arguably one of James Gunn's best decisions was to put her at the front and center of the entire thing. Harley was away from the rest of the team for a while, which allowed her to shine by herself, and she proved once again that she was a badass who needed no rescue. Aside from having some of the funniest moments, she also was the heart of the whole film. Number 9, Birds of Prey. After becoming a hit as the lone highlight of Suicide Squad and before stealing the show once again in The Suicide Squad, Margot Robbie was rightly given her own solo Harley Quinn movie. The ridiculously titled Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn was soon retitled to just Birds of Prey. But though her name was dropped from the title, make no mistake that this was her film. Breaking free of the Suicide Squad and of the Joker, a point that was driven home in spectacular fashion, allowed for a different side of the character to be seen. The protective, vulnerable, and wholesome side of Harley was on show, but absolutely none of the crazy wonderfulness that made her so popular in the first place was sacrificed. This was Harley at her most chaotic and her most eccentric, going up against Ewan McGregor's unnervingly compelling black mask. And while Harley had to be diluted somewhat to fit into both Suicide Squad ensembles, here she could flourish like never before or since. Ultimately, the movie suffered from releasing at the height of a pandemic and from poor marketing in general, and it really did deserve more of an audience. Number 8, Bombshell. Bombshell was designed to offer a scathing look at the very real accusations from several women working at Fox News of sexual harassment by its founder and CEO, Roger Ailes. Add in the star power of Charlize Theron, Nicole Kidman, and Margot Robbie, and the film had the makings of something big. What was ultimately released was a hard-hitting piece based in and around the allegations made, though it failed to go deeper into the gritty realms as promised. Bombshell is about empowerment, certainly, but it never gets further than skimming the surface of the sexual assault at the heart of the subject. It could have gone so much further. To call Bombshell tame would perhaps be a little harsh, however. It feels as though the talent on screen could have been used for a further exploration into such a real issue. That being said, it is still a strong movie, in no small part thanks to the performances of all 3 lead women, to the surprise of absolutely no one. In particular, Margot Robbie is at the top of her game, receiving an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress, and it's not hard to see why. Number 7, Babylon. Alongside Amsterdam, Babylon was Margot Robbie's other 2022 film, and again was a box office bomb. Also, like Amsterdam, what was supposed to be another Oscar hit as Damien Chazelle's follow-up to La La Land ultimately fell far short of his expectations. As something of a love letter to Hollywood, the first of 2 such films that will appear on this list, Babylon followed the rise and fall of several characters, including Robbie's Nellie Leroy, as the world of film ushered in a new era in the 1920s. However, it ultimately felt like less a love letter and more an indictment of the Hollywood culture, instead highlighting depravity and debauchery rather than its glory. That being said, it's more thanks to falling shy of its incredibly lofty expectations than anything actually on screen that Babylon has been labelled such a flop. The over 3-hour runtime doesn't help its cause either. However, if you watch it for what it is and not for what it's supposed to be, and simply enjoy the chaos and commitment that both Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt bring, then it can be a damn enjoyable, unique experience. Number 6, About Time. With writing credits on the likes of Notting Hill, the Bridget Jones film series, and Love Actually to his name, Richard Curtis is one of the biggest names in the romantic comedy genre. It's not surprising in the least then that 2013's About Time was another huge success and feather in the man's cap. The premise is a little more out there than Curtis's previous work, as Domhnall Gleeson's Tim Lake finds out that all of the men in his family have the ability to time travel, and thus he uses this newly learned skill to try to improve his life. As expected, it is utterly charming and certainly doesn't lack in the comedy aspect, while Gleeson is a perfect fit, as is rom-com legend Rachel McAdams. Being one of her earliest acting credits and coming before she became a household name, Margot Robbie's involvement is minimal but crucial. She plays Tim's first love interest, for whom he initially goes back in time for before realizing the consequences and butterfly effect of his actions. Realistically, her role was to be fallen in love with, which she's basically been doing effortlessly for over a decade now. Number 5. The Big Short. The Big Short brought together an impressive ensemble cast to tell the story of how a handful of people saw the housing crisis of 2008 coming. Naturally, with a story like this, there was a lot of jargon and concepts that the mainstream audience just wouldn't understand. Enter Margot Robbie. Ryan Gosling's Jared Vanette introduces her in a voiceover to explain the concept of subprime mortgages. And that she did in a bubble bath with a glass of champagne. It was hilarious, and then she was gone, never to be seen in the film again. The movie itself is outstanding, with a wonderful cast. However, no matter how good Gosling, Christian Bale, or Brad Pitt were, Margot Robbie's scene arguably stole the whole show. There was no real acting involved. She wasn't playing a character. She merely showed up and explained what was likely confusing audiences watching, but she was compelling, and that truly shows that her talent knows no bounds. Number 4. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There is some tough competition, as the director has some incredibly strong and influential movies to his name, but Once Upon a Time in Hollywood may be Quentin Tarantino's most popular work. He has gone on record to say it is his own personal favorite, and it's easy to see why. This effort is something of a love letter to the movie industry, while telling an amended version of the events surrounding Sharon Tate and the Charles Manson murders of the 1960s. It has everything you could want from a Tarantino flick, led by the three-headed powerhouse of Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Margot Robbie. Robbie's appearance in the film is a strange one, as she actually has very little screen time, particularly when compared to that of Pitt and DiCaprio. However, being on screen for around half an hour of the almost 3-hour runtime allowed Robbie to show exactly what she could do with both limited time and dialogue. She is captivating and spellbinding even when she doesn't have much to say, and there are few greater testaments to her unrivaled talent than her portrayal of Sharon Tate. Number 3. Barbie. Could anyone have really predicted what a smash hit and cultural phenomenon Barbie would turn out to be in the summer of 2023? It could easily have been a cheap movie based around a toy, but Barbie told a powerful story with a real message, balanced perfectly with the wacky and funny side of things. Ryan Gosling's Ken grabbed many of the headlines, and looking back, it would be hard to see anyone else in the role. His comedic chops alone served him well, but like he said in the movie, there is no Ken without Barbie. Margot Robbie may have been the obvious choice for a stereotypical Barbie, but she more than backs this up with a performance full of emotion, heart, and vulnerability that encompassed everything the film was trying to say. It's a testament to what Greta Gerwig and co created, that Barbie could feature something as ludicrous as Barbie Land, but tackle real issues with such grace and eloquence at the same time. While it received a handful of Oscar nominations, the fact that both Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie were overlooked for Best Director and Best Actress respectively is just criminal. Number 2. The Wolf of Wall Street. Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio have collaborated together on a number of projects, and The Wolf of Wall Street is up there with the best of them. The story of Jordan Belfort's rise and fall from grace was brought to the screen in a unique and utterly compelling fashion. Realistically, DiCaprio's character is not one that anyone should be rooting for or laughing with. The movie glorifies every kind of depravity and illicit crime it could manage, and yet is sheer entertainment. Surrounded by the chaos of Wall Street, the narcotics, booze, criminal activity, and general human garbage that were the employees of Stratton Oakmont, Margot Robbie's Naomi is the undeniable human element of the piece. Nothing else is particularly relatable, unless you happen to have smuggled millions of dollars across national borders strapped to another being. But Naomi, as a wife and a mother who ultimately outgrows Jordan, brings a real sobering quality to proceedings. It was this masterpiece in 2013 that truly set Robbie on her path to superstardom, and it is nothing short of insane to think that this came just 5 years after Vigilante. Number 1. I, Tonya. Margot Robbie is no stranger to bringing real people to the screen, but arguably her best ever work on screen came portraying legendary figure skater Tonya Harding. The biopic itself manages to blend comedy, plenty of it coming from Harding's sheer bluntness, with the darker and more emotional elements of the story. It's funny but brutal at the same time, and while other movies may struggle to bring two drastic drastically different tones like this together, I, Tonya succeeds and then some. There truly aren't enough superlatives to properly describe Margot Robbie's performance as Tonya Harding, and she takes one of America's most hated sports personalities and portrays her with a quiet dignity that actually turns her into a sympathetic character. There aren't many who could have pulled it off, but Robbie has the talent to evoke such emotions while still making you laugh. There have been plenty of movies on this list that didn't quite live up to the talent Margot Robbie brought to the table, but I, Tonya does not have that problem. If it weren't for Frances McDormand's outstanding performance in 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, it's highly likely this role would have earned Margot Robbie her first Best Actress win. Her work certainly deserved it.